We open to a very long ship indeed. In through a window we go to find an apartment of some kind. Kim enters with an unknown woman, and they're very friendly indeed, despite her not being Libby. Kim, this early in a story, suggests it's one about him, so maybe there's a chance this is the episode where we learn something about him rather than watch him be the victim of something unpleasant. Not Libby throws his comm badge away, and he's upset about it for a couple of seconds until more face-mashing happens. This is why you're still a sodding ensign, Kim. Curious thing though, her neck appears to be glowing as though illuminated from inside. Concern from Kim is brushed away again and they move to a bed. Well, now he's flashing too. Did Kim just catch a space STI? I guess that answers my question on whether he'll get some actual character development or just be a plot device again, so let's move over to Janeway and see what she's doing. The answer is helping the crew of Longship with some repairs, though a guy who I presume to be the captain is acting like a bit of a cock about it. Maybe it's because they've met some of the Delta Quadrant's more unsavoury characters just like we have, what with them being a generational ship on a long journey and all. Janeway draws parallels between the two of them, saying Voyager's journey may last multiple generations too, which isn't what the current total we ran in the last episode said, but maybe she's exaggerating to play up their similarities. He settles down a bit, becoming somewhat more accommodating as we get ready to test fire their engines and see if we fix them. While everybody else is working, Kim's doing some post-coital sightseeing. What he's actually doing is shitting a brick at the thought of how many rules he just broke by being a dirty little bastard. That sort of thinking has never bothered Chakotay, of course, but then I guess rank has its privileges. A bit of shaking alerts Kim to that engine test and starts his panic all over again, as he was supposed to be involved in it. Rushing to where he was meant to be doesn't prevent a little ridicule from Paris and B'Elanna. He needn't have bothered though, it all goes to shit and we abort the test. Even worse, it's fucked up their ship and will take days to repair. I guess that means Kim will be around not Libby for a little while longer. Paris has figured out what he was up to, of course. A touch more mockery causes Kim to admit that yes, he done a fucky, and yes, it was clearly the wrong choice, so he'll never contact her again, honest. Back in his quarters, he gives Not Libby a call, making sure to encrypt the signal so it looks even more dodgy if someone finds it. After a little saccharine flirting, they get down to talking about the shag they did. Except, not quite. It seems Not Libby's species do things a little differently, so I guess that's what the glowing was about. Whatever it was, he's a fan and wants to do some more. Up on the bridge, Tuvok's noticed there's an encoded signal being broadcast. We can't tell where it's from, but we can see that the target is a section on the Longship. Paris realizes what's happening and says he'll help track it, instead surreptitiously breaking the connection and suggesting it might just have been a glitch. A dick he may be, but his loyalty to his friends is above reproach. Later on, as they're being briefed about repairs to the Longship, Paris lets Kim know that he was nearly rumbled earlier and needs to sort his shit out. That might not be an option, as Kim seems to think this thing with Not Libby could be serious. The conversation ends when Seven tells Kim that they'll be working together in astrometrics to track damage on the Longship. While there, they have a somewhat awkward conversation about love, which Seven likens to a disease, so that's the title explained then, before Kim's body starts to do that glowy thing again. He tries to pretend that it's nothing, but that's a difficult con to pull off when you resemble a fucking light bulb. Seven isn't buying it and drags him to sickbay. The doc runs through possible causes for his condition. Kim says it's none of them, but isn't forthcoming on the real reason. That only leaves the doc with the possibility of a virus, so he'd best lock down the entire ship and let the captain know. That's enough to convince Kim to confess, but not until asking Seven to leave. The doc is concerned after being told, and rightly so. Doing sexy times with an unknown species isn't frowned upon for nothing. Diplomacy aside, the potential biological incompatibilities are a serious medical threat. He says any such contact needs to be fully authorized and signed off by a doctor. In short, this is a top-tier fuck-up. Not only will Kim have to get a full medical, but so will Not Libby, and he's required to tell the captain, too. She's pissed at him, obviously, not just because of the rules he's broken, but also because she'll have to let Longship Captain know what's happened so they can assess the medical repercussions too. Given how hesitant they were to trust us in the first place, that conversation's probably going to be less than delightful. Kim tries to explain that his relationship with Not Libby isn't just casual, but Janeway doesn't give a shit. This will be going in his official record, and she orders him to end whatever he thinks he has going on. His hesitation in responding suggests this will be an order he'll struggle to follow. Neelix has a problem. No, not that one. This problem is to do with food disappearing from the mess hall. Tuvok is as unconcerned with this as he was when it happened before, during Infinite Regress, which still feels out of character to me, but at least it's consistent. Neelix is prepared for his apathy this time. Not only has food gone missing, but a section of the ship that's normally empty has had life support switched on, and that wasn't authorized either. To a Jeffries tube we go, where we find blankets and food. Oh, and a stowaway from the longship, too. Speaking of which, Kim's over there now to say his goodbyes to Not Libby. He explains what happened, how he was caught because of the glowing skin. Not Libby is surprised, not by the event itself, but because it's happening to him. She thought their biology was too different to make the super-alien mating bond work. You know, the one that's used when you want to be a couple for life. Still, there's some good news. It'll slowly reverse itself as long as they stay away from each other. Kim gets up to leave, reaches the door, and then comes back so they can start banging again. The way he's acting, Janeway's going to have to invent a new commissioned officer rank below ensign, just so she can demote him. Chakotay and Tuvok are having a chat with our stowaway. He says he was able to get on board quite easily, our security being somewhat primitive, and to be fair, he's not wrong. Regardless, he's not going back. He doesn't want to be on the longship, and he's not alone in that conclusion. Their captain may have given us the impression it's an absolute delight, but that's not the whole truth. Many are displeased by their isolationist stance, and some of them might even be willing to do a bit of the old violence to change things. Tuvok tries to coax more from him, but he clams up, believing this to be part of a plan to uncover the rebel movement aboard the longship. Unwilling to elaborate further, Chakotay has little choice but to stick him in the brig and call the longship to let them know. As Janeway and Chakotay have dinner later, they're discussing this rebel movement. Longship captain says it's just a rumour, but is, interviewing the stowaway all the same. I wonder if our brig is soundproof. Anywho, the shitstorm that Kim caused has had consequences. They'll still take our help repairing the ship, but all crew must be segregated at all times now. Chakotay thinks that's a bit harsh, a view he also holds for Janeway's choice to leave a permanent note on Kim's record. He's wondering if the problem is a broken rule, or the fact that it came from her squeaky clean ensign. Janeway tries to argue it away, but her bristly response suggests Chakotay's aim might be closer to the mark than she'd like to admit. B'Elanna to the rescue, and she calls Janeway to engineering as she has some progress to report. Longship captain joins her on the way, and is a judgmental twat about Kim. He also says the super-alien mating bond is a very serious thing indeed, and can lead to illness or death if a bonded pair are separated. I'm sure this news will definitely lead to long-lasting consequences beyond this episode. We'll have to sort that out later, as we've got other problems. B'Elanna's found hull fractures on Voyager. They're the same ones that are on the longship, and they're happening at the docking port that joins us to them. Hell of a coincidence, and naturally, it isn't one. The cause is a parasite that eats metal, and we caught it from the longship. And that's not even the bad news. See, these little bastards aren't natural. They've been engineered, and given that the longship doesn't meet many strangers, it's probably by one of their own people. Not Libby is in her quarters, looking at a picture that bears a striking resemblance to those hull-eating bugs we just learned about. Either news travels fast, or she's proper dodgy. A call from Kim gets her attention, but he's learned his lesson and can't talk long. Instead, he teleports her over to the shuttle he's in. He's finished his work early, so thinks he can get a sneaky visit in before he's due back. Not Libby wants a joyride and suggests a nearby space cloud. Kim sees no issue with this, which is quite a curious choice. Voyager's security might be bloody awful, but even they're going to notice a shuttle flying off into the distance. We reach the space cloud and Not Libby is enchanted by it. I guess you must not get out much when you're part of a generational ship that doesn't talk to strangers. A chat about how Kim is tired of constantly being the perfect ensign with a stick up his arse risks going somewhere interesting, so naturally we stop it with an interruption. The interruption in question is an alarm, and the alarm is because the Delta Flyer is closing on them. Tuvok calls, tells him he's a dickhead, and orders him back to Voyager, adding that he should bring Not Libby too. You know, what with her being wanted for sabotage and all. Longship captain has her bang to rights. They found the schematics for the metal parasite on her computer, which is pretty sodding clumsy for a saboteur. How did they know to check her computer? Reasons. Not Libby is past denying things, but clarifies that she had no intention of destroying the longship. The weaknesses she's made are at the joins between sections so that the longship can become a lot of short ships, each self-governing. Janeway steps in to switch their focus from the argument to fixing things instead. If the longship breaks apart without letting the crew know what's coming, hull breaches could potentially kill people. Not Libby agrees to help slow things down so they can prepare, but not to stop it. That'll have to do. Everybody except Kim and Janeway leave, partly to start work, but mostly to clear the room so that she can tear him a new arsehole. Instead, she says that he's clearly under the influence of some alien chemical shite and confines him to sickbay. Whether that's a generous concession to Kim or a desire to gloss over the damage to her own authority is a decision for the viewer. He's not willing to go to sickbay though, and after being a dick to her on the bridge, she pulls him into her ready room. He launches into a whole thing about being in love and how that explains his behaviour, the obedient Kim of the last 5 years crumbling under the fluttering of his heart, and presumably the turgidity of his loins. He even tries to make a parallel with Janeway and her ex-fiancé. The last I checked, she didn't lose her shit when that ended, a fact that completely undermines his entire argument, but pop off, Kim, I guess. A bit of shaky draws their exchange to a close. We go to the bridge and discover the cause is Longship, specifically that it's going to lose that name very soon. Some kabooms there cause some kabooms here, and Janeway thinks now would be a good time to not be strapped onto it, which is going to be a problem, as the docking clamps are stuck. Longship is still kabooming, and we're still attached. Tuvok says we've got about 3 minutes till it proper kabooms and takes us with it. While we work on getting undocked, Janeway gives Longship Captain a call to see how they're doing with evacuating the unsafe bits, learning that they'll need 2 minutes at least. Paris interrupts to let us know we can undock now, and Chakotay tells him to get on with it. Kim has other ideas though, and says we should wait. He says that if we do science things with our structural fields, we can give the Longship more time to evacuate. Now, I don't claim to have any special education in mathematics, but if it's going to take 3 minutes to kaboom and 2 minutes to evacuate, I'm not convinced this is entirely necessary. Maybe Janeway's feeling generous as she decides to give them a margin of error. We do science to the structural fields and reinforce the Longship, putting ourselves in danger in the process. Not Libby can't resist the temptation to rub Voyager's generosity in Longship Captain's face, considering it proof that not all strangers are complete bastards. I guess we've not told them about the multiple genocides we've been involved in. There's a bit of an exchange where Longship Captain wants to make another attempt at keeping the ship in one piece, with Not Libby managing to quickly dissuade him, before they call Voyager to let them know they've finished getting their people to safety. Incidentally, that means the evacuation only took 1 minute and 18 seconds, just saying. Voyager manages to undock and scarper, while the Longship becomes the convoy formerly known as Longship. Once things are settled, most of them group together, but those who are unhappy with how things were have decided to forge their own path. Not Libby is one of them, and as Kim visits, proves the strength of their love by not even considering the possibility of joining Voyager. They're off to look at a system they passed a while back, and they've got medication to deal with the symptoms of that super-alien mating bond, so she'll be fine. Thanks for your help. Kim instead chooses to go cold turkey. The doc wants Janeway to order him to accept treatment, but she refuses. She also admits to Kim that Chakotay was on the money about viewing Kim differently from the rest of the crew, and that's why her response was so harsh. She's still going to leave that formal reprimand on his record though, so fuck Kim, I guess. Later in the mess hall, Seven arrives to thank him for doing some of her work. He's trying to keep busy to take his mind off things. They have an exchange on the nature of love and heartbreak, Seven saying that love isn't a disease after all, before wishing him to get well soon. I guess consistent metaphors aren't something the Borg bothered to learn about. She leaves Kim to stare wistfully out of the window and pine for Not Libby as we fly away. So, now we know that Kim can stand up for something if he wants to. Unfortunately, what he's willing to stand up for is getting his dick wet. If this was meant to be a show of how Kim is growing, it fails spectacularly. He comes across as a petulant, angsty teen rather than the great romantic that the story aims for, ironically serving only to underline his status as the child of the crew. Staying silent as you watch a guy get dragged to his death? Yes, ma'am. Being told not to bang a stranger while on duty, one whose alien biology could potentially kill him and the entire rest of the crew? Well, I'm sorry, Captain, but that's where I draw the line. What a fucking toddler. In fact, no, that's not fair. We have an actual 3-year-old on the ship whose self-control is better than Kim's. And this is supposed to be a growth episode? The whole thing is ill-conceived. It doesn't help that there's some abysmal writing in this one. The attempted breakup scene halfway through was cumbersome, to say the least, and Kim's speech to Janeway later on was even worse. Garrett Wang does what he can with what he's given, and we should give him some points for that, but there's a limit to how much pledge this particular deuce can take. The performances of our guests leave something to be desired too, coming across as entirely wooden. Perhaps that was an intentional choice to indicate their species isn't used to social interaction, but that feels like a generous explanation to me. It's a shame, as I know I've seen Musetta Vander in other things and have no memory of hating her performance in those, so maybe the general mood on set was influenced by the quality of the material they were working with. There is one potentially interesting implication from this episode, though. When he's originally getting his ass chewed by Janeway, Kim quotes a Starfleet regulation that says any alien sexy times must be signed off by a doctor and a relevant commanding officer. If this is the case, does that mean Janeway gave the go-ahead for Chakotay in Unforgettable? She was from an unknown and, indeed, unknowable race, and he's the second in command, so there's only one person for him to ask. Even with the 24th century's less taboo-drenched attitudes towards sex and sexuality, that must still have been a somewhat awkward conversation given their implied relationship all the way back in Season 2. The fact that the only entertaining point I found in the whole episode is one I made for myself is probably a more damning review than I can ever write. The strength of Season 5 to date had left me wondering if we were going to get through the whole thing without a single turkey. I guess I now have an answer to that question. End of episode.
So, the replicator's rationed, right?
Yes.
And that's why people have to eat Neelix's cooking, right?
Correct.
But the replicator can break things down too, like plates and stuff, right?
What's your point?
Well, why aren't people just sticking Neelix's stuff in the replicator and getting something else instead?
Janeway banned it.
Why?
Because everything Neelix cooks is made of Leola root. She's worried that it'll contaminate the storage tanks, and then all the replicated food will taste of Leola root too.
But we recycle all our waste products too. We're already eating literal shit.
You were saying you'd prefer Leola root to feces?
Fair point. Woof.